The Triarch Assembly's central spire gleamed like a shard of starlight suspended above the gas-wrapped world of Seren 6, its structure a lattice of crystalline architecture and gravitic coils humming with ancient pride. Inside, silence reigned, as the chamber awaited a visitor no one had expected, let alone prepared for. When the human fleet arrived, 12 blood-streaked vessels bearing the scars of annihilated Vakar dreadnoughts, the Assembly's transmission, lines choked with encrypted panic. They did not hail. They did not posture. They simply held position at the system's edge, their ships locked in an intimidating sphere around the diplomatic carrier Vigil. The silence was louder than any war cry. Commander Rayena Solari stood at the forefront of Vigil's command deck, her posture straight as steel, her charcoal-gray diplomatic uniform broken only by a single crimson insignia stitched over her heart, the mark of the Terran Accord. Her dark eyes scanned the forward display, emotionless as the sensor data poured in. Behind her, Elias Kale monitored proximity clusters with a soldier's detachment, while analyst Juno Harrow wrung her fingers, murmuring political expectations to herself, like a dying prayer. The Triarch Assembly's gate finally opened, a shimmering corridor of folded spacetime extending from Seren 6's orbital arc, and Solari gave a single nod. No speech, no anthem, just movement, smooth, deliberate, absolute. The Vigil entered the corridor escorted by 2 memory vault ships etched with scorched Vakar glyphs. It wasn't just an arrival, it was a message. Within the assembly hall, Triarch Marshal Orun watched from the central tier as the humans disembarked in precision formation. Solari stepped forward alone, hands unarmed, flanked by silence and flame-scarred honor. Her presence was a paradox, unthreatening in action, but soaked in symbolic warning. "I am Commander Rayena Solari," she said, voice calm yet resonant, "representative of the Terran Accord. We've come to explain why your sky is free again." 100 species watched her like she was an anomaly, a phantom from forgotten archives. Whispers about Earth had become legend, a war-racked race that vanished into silence after sealing their borders 4 centuries ago. None had heard from them since. Many believed they'd perished in civil war. But now they stood here, with broken Dominion hulls braided into their architecture. Councillor Medrix, face flickering with disdain, rose from his obsidian dais. "Explain," he rasped. "You arrive cloaked in war relics and demand an audience without protocol or vetting." Solari's gaze didn't shift. 17 offers were sent to the Vakar, she replied, her tone still diplomatic. 17, each ignored. They entered our space, executed our civilians, desecrated sanctuary worlds. We responded only after the last offer was answered with fire. The room stirred like a swarm of disturbed insects. Juno stepped forward, producing digital records embedded with coordinates, timestamps, plea messages, and post-strike analysis. "Our response was proportionate to the threat," she said. "What you see before you is not triumph, it is consequence." Marshal Orun's fingers tightened around the curved arms of his seat. He recognized the weight in Solari's words. The power of absolute restraint turned into lethal momentum. "And now?" he asked, voice hushed. "You seek what, exactly?" Solari held up a memory shard, translucent and pulsing. "Recognition, observation status, and the right to intervene should your body fail to prevent future Vakar remnants, or others, from breaching our sovereignty." Medrix laughed coldly. "You presume to threaten the Assembly?" "No," Solari replied, not blinking. "We offer warning. We don't start wars. We end them. Quickly." That line sent a tremor through the chamber, not from the bravado of it, but from the terrifying sincerity. Juno leaned into the microphone line, her voice softer, more human. "We are here not to intimidate, but to avoid further tragedy. We've seen extinction. We chose not to die. We rebuilt for survival, not dominance. But if we are attacked, we will finish it." The assembly erupted into overlapping tongues. translators scrambling to decode fury, fear, and suspicion. Solari simply stood still, eyes locked on Orun. It wasn't posturing, it was memory, and Orun knew that look. He'd seen it in soldiers who survived collapsed campaigns, those who emerged not with anger, but purpose. He turned toward his aides and whispered something too low for translators to catch. The lights dimmed. The council moved to closed session. And above Seren 6, the Terran ships held their silent vigil, humming with buried engines and unreadable intent. In that moment, across the galaxy, species who thought humanity extinct began to ask a new question. If Earth had survived this long, in silence, what else had they become in the dark? Aboard the Assembly's auxiliary observatory station Arivan 9, Triarch Marshal Orun paced along the perimeter of the star-draped chamber, eyes fixed on the slowly rotating data projections fed from humanity's diplomatic flagship. Every scan, every text signature, every decoded artifact contradicted 4 centuries of complacent belief. Earth had not perished. It had matured in isolation like a blade forged in silence. And now that blade hung motionless before them, unsheathed, but not yet swung. Orun's thoughts were interrupted by a priority pulse from Councillor Medrix, whose voice, sharp as glass, cut through the channel. They must be lying. Those vessels, those diplomatic monstrosities, they're built for war. They've repainted Vakar dreadnoughts like trophies and dragged them here to shame us. Orun responded with weariness. They're not painted, Medrix. Those scars are real, etched, not polished. I believe them when they say it's not a boast, it's a warning. Meanwhile, on board the Vigil, Solari sat in quiet discussion with her inner council in the low-lit tactical chamber. Elias Kale stood before the display table where a Vakar remnant fleet had been detected in the mid-orbital grave fields near Sector Jaina 44, an unclaimed region bordering Assembly protectorates. They're regrouping, Kale said. Scattered units, no motherships, but several strike-class cruisers. Biosignatures match what the Vakar used during the Tormar siege. Solari nodded, her gaze unwavering. Intercept protocols? Ready, Kyle replied. But we're not cleared to engage unless the Assembly requests intervention. Juno, who had been silent until then, leaned forward. They won't, not unless provoked. They fear appearing weak in front of each other. Solari rose, fixing the tactical map with a penetrating stare. Then we provoke them into choosing protection over pride. Hours later, back in the assembly chamber, Reyna Solari addressed the collective again, this time with diplomatic calm, underscored by grim urgency. Our long-range surveillance, she began, has picked up movement of an unsanctioned Vakar. Fleet operating inside contested zones. We've traced their routes. They intend to strike a recon post stationed near Tylus Cradle, a node that holds one of your Assembly's oldest botanical research vaults. The chamber's murmurs erupted. Again, Tylus Cradle was defenseless. The nearest Assembly patrol fleet was 3 days out. We are offering protection, Solari continued. Our vessels are within strike range. Give us your authorization, and we will neutralize the threat. Surgical. Clean. Immediate. Medrix slammed a scaled fist on the rail. This is manufactured. Crisis. A pretext for militarized presence. But then, from the gallery stands, young observer Velen stood and, for the first time, broke protocol by speaking without recognition. What if she's right? He asked, voice clear and trembling. We saw what they did to the Vakar. I reviewed the battle data myself. Their ships didn't just fire. They disabled reactors without vaporizing crews. They minimized loss, even for their enemies. A hush fell. Orun watched Solari closely. If we allow your intervention, he asked, will you leave after the engagement? Solari held his gaze. Yes, unless further violations occur. We are not conquerors. We are the guardians of our threshold. But if your people are endangered, and you are too slow to act, then we will act in your stead. The enemy is already moving. After hours of deliberation, shouting, deflection, paranoia, the Assembly voted. Barely. 58% approved temporary engagement authorization. Humanity was cleared to assist. Within minutes, Vigil and 2 stealth-configured Guardian ships detached and burst from the corridor like silent knives. At the edge of Tylus Cradle's moon shadow, the Vakar remnants were already positioning, their ion harpoons. The human ships did not open with fire. They opened with proximity jammers, ship-slicing grav pulses, and boarding pods equipped with zero-pressure exosuits. In under 4 minutes, the Vakar fleet was disabled, not destroyed. No civilian assets harmed. 3 of the ships were forcibly reprogrammed, piloted back toward the assembly for examination. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration, live-streamed. Precise. Beautifully terrifying. From the assembly's private command balcony, Marshal Orun whispered to himself as he watched Earth's ships pull away without celebration or delay. They don't threaten, they promise. Across the chamber, Medric seethed in silence while Velin watched with a quiet awe. And aboard the Vigil, Solari sat alone in her quarters, staring at a digital photo of Earth's shattered old cities, now regrown with glass. Spires and moss-covered memorials. Peace with teeth, she murmured to herself, or silence with consequence. 2 days passed, and the silence that followed the Terran intervention was more deafening than any explosion. In the galactic political spectrum, where every maneuver was a game of shadows and layered intentions, Earth's actions rang out like a clean bell strike in a cathedral of whispers. The Vakar remnant fleet had been subdued without loss of civilian life, without collateral damage, and with an efficiency so total it bordered on supernatural. No calls for backup, no drawn out. Siege. Just decisive, absolute protection. The assembly had not yet issued a formal statement, caught between gratitude and dread, but whispers began circling in the hallways of power, that the Terrans might be something the galaxy had never truly encountered, a force that does not ask for conquest, but simply removes the threat. Commander Rayena Solari stood in the central observatory of the Vigil, watching the stars rotate slowly behind the polished alloy glass, her hands clasped behind her back. Analyst Juno Harrow entered quietly and handed her a neural record slate. "You need to see this," she said. The slate pulsed to life, displaying a confidential feed from Arivan 9. Triarch Marshal Orun was speaking in a secure, closed council. Session and the translation interface had already flagged 24 critical markers, tones of concern, indications of policy divergence, and most notably, evidence of splintered factions forming within the assembly. "They're breaking," Solari said, eyes fixed on Orun's face. "Not because of what we did, because of what it meant." Juno nodded. "The inner blocks don't trust the outer systems to keep themselves safe. Some are already petitioning for Terran intervention protocols on their borders. That's never happened before, petitioning protection from a species that isn't even a member." Solari turned to face her. "What about the memory vaults? Final edits done. We can broadcast the cultural ledger within the hour. It'll make our position impossible to ignore." Solari gave a faint nod. "Do it." Hours later, every diplomatic channel, every interstellar archive node, and every assembly data wall flickered to life with a curated Terran transmission. Not propaganda, but testimony. Voices of humans, survivors of planetary bombardment. Children grown in bunker cities, old soldiers who remembered Earth's last internal war. The message was simple. We chose isolation to survive ourselves before surviving you. The footage rolled like a blade against glass, images of crumbled Terran metropoles re-emerging with bioluminescent architecture, stories of the last civilian, evacuation before the Vakar incursion, the voice of a grieving mother who watched a Dominion war beast crush her husband before Earth responded with vengeance. It was raw, elegant, and unflinchingly honest. Humanity wasn't offering friendship. They were offering the truth. Back on Seren 6, Orun watched the feed in silence, the edges of his hands trembling ever so slightly. It was not the violence that disturbed him. It was the restraint. The humans had the tools for genocide. Instead, they had chosen to disable, preserve, and then retreat. In doing so, they had stolen every argument from his war-hungry peers. Councillor Medrix, however, was not silent. He stormed into the Chamber of Seven Voices, demanding that the Assembly move to freeze Earth's diplomatic request under emergency security protocols. "They manipulate us," he shouted. "They show us scars and call them credentials. We do not reward war machines with political welcome." But his tirade was too late. Because even as he spat venom, 37 minor systems had already signed a proposal to recognize the Terran Accord as a probationary guardian entity, essentially bypassing Assembly consensus through mass alignment. In response, the Assembly's Core Council authorized a verification mission. A multinational envoy would travel to Earth's outermost relay point to assess their capabilities, culture, and most crucially, intent. When the delegation's vessel exited fold space near the Terran periphery, it was met not with warships, but with stillness. The sector was calm, nothing but drifting stardust and a single station carved into an asteroid, its outer surface engraved with the names of every Terran civilian lost in the Vakar conflict. Commander Solari herself waited aboard the station, unarmed, dressed not in armor but in a ceremonial black uniform lined with silver thread, each thread a nanobraid containing archived names and battle logs. "Welcome," she said as the alien. Delegation stepped through the gravlock chamber, clearly stunned. "You came to verify. We came to remember." What followed was not a tour of military might, but of memory. The vaults of Terran experience, interactive histories, neural dreamscapes of extinction-level catastrophes survived only through unity. Images of children playing in crater gardens built atop old battlegrounds. The envoy leader, a soft-spoken, serpent-skinned envoy from the Sirok hegemony, whispered to her aide as they watched a child teach an AI sculptor how to build a memorial. "They've learned how to live inside their scars." At the end of the day, the delegation was offered no deal, no bargain, no treaty. Only a single phrase embedded in a farewell code. "We exist not to dominate, but to ensure it never happens again." And as the envoy vessel returned to Assembly space, the Terran fleet moved into position behind them, not to pursue, but to shadow. The message was clear. Earth was done hiding. Now it would watch. The return of the envoy from Terran space sent ripples through the Assembly like tremors before a fault line break. The final report was not laced with alarm, but with something far more dangerous: respect. The delegates described a species that had rebuilt itself, not around conquest, but remembrance. They hadn't just survived tragedy. They had structured an entire civilization to carry it, to wear every scar as both warning and principle. But what unsettled the Assembly most was that humanity had no intention of asking permission to protect others. They simply would. The vote for probationary induction loomed, and the political blocs split like fractured ice. On one side, traditionalists, like Medrix and the Core Doctrine Council, demanded a formal delay. On the other, an unlikely coalition of frontier representatives, newly awakened sympathizers, and species with long histories of abandonment pushed forward. In the shadows, Marshal Orun moved quietly between them, urging caution, not out of fear, but out of reverence. "They are not a threat," he whispered to his fellow Triarchs, "but they are capable of becoming one. That difference matters." What no one knew yet was that a Vakar remnant, desperate and dying, had intercepted the envoy's return route and marked it for destruction. 10 Dominion relic cruisers, ragged with entropy but still equipped with biofission cores, launched from the ghost sectors of the Errol Verge. Their target, the Assembly's ship, Halcyon Star, flagship of the verification mission. The attack came without warning, within 12 minutes of fold exit. The Halcyon Star's shields were overwhelmed instantly, its escort ships vaporized in a flash storm of plasma javelins. What should have been a massacre ended with a pulse from the dark. Because shadowing them, silent, distant, precise, was the Terran fortress ship Adrastaya. Built into the frame of a salvaged planetary defense ring, it moved with the gravity of inevitability. No announcements, no fanfare. It struck. Drone thorns punctured Vakar hulls and initiated cascade detainment protocols, arresting reactors mid-cycle, flooding weapons bays with inertial disablers, sealing enemy crews in stasis before their suicide failsafes could trigger. By the time the assembly vessel stabilized, the battlefield was still. 10 Dominion cruisers disabled, 0 Terran casualties, and all assembly delegates alive. The response time had been 90 seconds. Live footage of the rescue streamed straight into assembly command centers. This time, there were no debates, no posturing. The vote was called within the hour. 82% voted to induct the Terran Accord as a probationary defense member with immediate emergency response authority. Councillor Medrick stormed out of the chamber mid-vote, his legacy shattered. Meanwhile, in a private upper hall, high above Seren 6, Solari met Marshal Oren beneath the towering mosaic of the Assembly's founding, now slightly cracked from a recent tremor. She offered him a sealed data prism. "Everything we've done," she said, "is in there. Our technologies, our trauma, our reasons. Share it or bury it, but understand that we will no longer wait to be accepted before we act." Oren took the prism without a word. Then, after a long pause, he said softly, "You are not what we expected." Solari gave a tired smile. Neither were we. As she walked away, her boots echoed in the marble corridor like the beat of war drums held back by memory. Across the galaxy, new protocols were initialized: Terran peace zones, mutual response alerts, AI-administered casualty buffers. On hundreds of worlds, statues began construction, depicting not human warriors, but guardians cloaked in shadow, arms outstretched, shielding those behind them. Earth had not demanded the galaxy's trust. It had earned it through restraint, sharper than any blade. And far from Seren 6, on a quiet moon where the last survivors of the Vakar screamed against stasis walls, a child watched from a Terran station window, her breath fogging the glass. She had been born in a crater. She had never seen war, and she never would, because Earth had decided she wouldn't have to. Solari watched the stars from her command chair aboard the Vigil, eyes distant, the weight of history pressing down, like gravity. "We didn't return to conquer," she whispered to herself. "We returned to keep watch." And across the heavens, the Terran Accord began its silent duty, not feared as tyrants nor worshipped as saviors, but respected as the force that rose from extinction, not with vengeance, but with purpose,